All right, guys, so you're making me feel as if this is such a powerful argument in favor of biosimilars that they should all be incredibly successful. But that's not the reality. So there is a disconnect here. There seems to be this great alignment of patients and providers and payers all in favor, and yet that's not what we're seeing in the marketplace. So something's not right here, and I'm not quite sure what it is. So we started with this conversation over evidence-based care. So you're all, to some degree, leaders. And so is this something where those who are not spending their whole day in the front lines and in the trenches dealing with the patients and have more administrative roles and bigger kind of almost public health kind of perspectives, that they see this, but the rank and file level's not seeing it, so they're not doing it. And then they're confronted with evidence and the heuristics, behavioral economics. I've been given this drug for 20 years. It's always worked for me. I'm not trying this new thing. I'm not quite sure what the deal is. Help me understand, because there's some disconnect between the way you're all expressing the power of and the compelling nature of the story around biosimilars and at least everything that I read about their market adoption. Who's going first on that one?
I can take that. Payers can be the biggest roadblock. Obviously, we've seen in Europe, they have a significant conversion for biosimilars. Their conversion is anywhere from 70 to 80%, whereas ours.
Hold on. So Bhavesh, when you say conversion, are we talking about a patient who is on a reference biologic being converted to? So
Biosimilar.
Because there's two things we have to establish and get into. One would be the clinical scenario. And so I think the potential for using something novel, even a brand new drug, or in the case of this, a biosimilar, new design, for a supportive care versus palliative care versus curative intent care, seems like the threshold is different. And so that's one aspect. And then the other would be the conversion factor. I might start a new patient, but I'm not going to have an established patient who's being effectively treated and switch them because it's not fair to them. I'm introducing some, albeit small, element of the unknown. So I want to make sure we address both of those issues in this part of the conversation.
Sure. And I'll have Dr. Diaz address some of those concerns too. But I'll give you my perspective. So I think that because Europe is actually a single payer system, you actually have a much better chance of actually converting because the government controls what biosimilar you're going to use for the healthcare system. If that was the case in the U.S., we would actually have a pretty big conversion rate from a reference product to a biosimilar in the U.S. too. But I think we leave it up to the payers to make that decision. And of course, it makes sense for them to take that, whatever cost savings they were able to get to use that for their plan design. And in regards to your question about efficacy of supportive care versus, more of cancer indications, from a pharmacist perspective, if a drug actually has the same mechanism of action and the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics are the same, I do not anticipate that you're going to see different results in adjuvant setting versus metastatic setting. And if that was truly the case, the FDA would actually make them do a clinical trial that was much longer, for them to show that. So I think the scientific rationale has been established, and I truly believe that there's no difference. But I think that may be one of the issues where there's a hesitance from providers where they think that maybe not using this in the metastatic setting is okay, but in the adjuvant setting, I don't have data for 5 years or 10 years for me to say that you're going to have the same type of efficacy in that setting. But I'll let Dr. Diaz kind of talk about what his perspective is on that.
But I think this issue is, I think it's more than that. When we take a compound and we make it orally bioavailable, even though we can measure the exact same chemical in the blood, we're still doing all that same testing. We're still starting that new orally bioavailable compound in salvage therapy, then first line, then adjuvant. So there is a big difference here. And it's got to introduce, or it's got to bring about some kind of emotional responses, even when you get outside of pure logic.
So whenever I look at it from my perspective, historically speaking, at least in the US, the biosimilars first became more available for the rheumatologic products, and they've been out for a little while. And I'll be quite frank with you, I don't prescribe those, so I'm not going to comment a lot on those. Where the biosimilars came into play in oncology was the supportive care medications, and we started having those available last year. And so this is still a little recent, and even more recently, within the past several months, we have the biosimilar therapeutics available. Now, it's not been a lot of time, but there are so many different factors that play into the role as to whether or not something is going to be entertained as an alternative or not. You know, and I'll just give a generic empiric example. If you have a biosimilar that comes out that's priced the same as the originator product, well, what's the incentive to do or change anything from a patient perspective in all reality? So pricing is a little component in there. And then also, you know, on top of what is the most important thing, efficacy and indications. So as long as you have the same efficacy and indications, you know, doctors will look at pricing, and that is one of the things that has to be taken into account. And we're just starting to get our arms around it and getting comfortable with choosing a biosimilar instead of a reference product. And I think that we've been bombarded with a lot of education in a positive way for the past several years that oncologists have just been waiting for the biosimilars to become available. And I know so many doctors that I've talked with that were excited as the products would come to market and they could actually prescribe them for the patients. And then they would see on one hand, whoa, my hands are tied, I can't prescribe it. Why? Because it's not approved by the payer. It's not on formulary with the payer, or it's not in the system. And that can happen for a multitude of reasons. Each different system, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, or commercial, is so complex and unique that you have to be a specialist just to understand what those differences are and how they function in each of those environments. So there's a multitude of factors that I think have you know, made it a little bit slow for practices to adopt. But now that we have them, especially with the therapeutics, for example, my practice is at least at 60% conversion, and we're trying to shoot for 80 to 90%.